You know what's truly bizarre? An entire generation was told they were the most special, capable, and promising cohort in human history, and only to work harder than anyone expected, and end up unable to afford the normal life their parents considered a baseline. This isn't just a story about bad luck or a shifting economy. It is a massive, unplanned psychological experiment that nobody signed up for. I'm talking about the Millennial generation, those born between 1981 and 1996. Who are currently living through a trauma response with a polished LinkedIn profile. Millennials became the first generation in modern history expected to be financially worse off than the generation that raised them. A fact confirmed by the Pew Research Center years ago. This has created a demographic walking around with a toxic psychological cocktail of grand achievement and perceived failure mixed together in their heads every single day. Imagine being told your entire childhood that you could be anything, win anything, and achieve anything, only to graduate into a world where the participation trophy is actually a master's degree that costs more than a 1970s house. The clinical term for this is cognitive dissonance, and millennials are currently drowning in it. But this goes much deeper than avocado toast jokes or the price of student loans. It is about the fundamental breaking of a psychological contract. Psychologist Jean Twenge, in her work on Generation Me, found that millennials score significantly higher on narcissism scales, as they were conditioned to see themselves as protagonists. But here is the last realist twist. They also score significantly higher on scales for clinical anxiety and depression. You have a generation that simultaneously believes they are destined for greatness and feels completely worthless because they cannot meet the basic markers of adulthood. This generation was the primary test subject for every parenting trend that emerged from the self-esteem movement of the 1980s and 90s. Helicopter parenting, everyone gets a trophy, and the idea that you are smart just for existing. You were all earnest attempts at better parenting based on the psychology of the time. Then, just as this group hit their formative 20s, the economic floor collapsed in 2008. And the whiplash alone should have been enough to hospitalize an entire age group. They graduated into a job market that had fundamentally changed, navigating a reality that their parents' maps were never designed to cover. To make matters worse, millennials were the first to have their identities formed in the crucible of early social media. They didn't grow up as digital natives like Gen Z, but they became adults just as Facebook and Instagram turned life into a 24/7 performance. Dr. Tim Kasser's research on materialism and well-being shows that when you base your self-worth on external validation, which is exactly what social media trains you to do, your mental health tanks. Millennials are running a permanent campaign for their own existence, and the polls never close. Now, add the fact that this generation is delaying or skipping the traditional life milestones that define adult identity: marriage, homeownership, and children. Surveys show they still want these things, but the economic math has made them borderline impossible. Without inherited wealth or extraordinary luck, this creates a state of prolonged adolescence, where people in their 40s still feel like they are waiting for their real life to start. The waiting room for this life is a rented apartment that costs 50% of their income. But while their therapist is booked until next year, when achieving the markers of adulthood becomes structurally unattainable, your brain doesn't just shrug it off. It enters a state of allostatic load. This is the wear and tear on the body and brain caused by chronic stress. The feeling of being stuck in the loading screen of your own life while the progress bar hasn't moved in a decade. Millennials were sold a specific narrative: effort equals outcome. They followed the rules, took the debt, and showed up to the office, only to find that the social contract had been shredded while they were in the library. When reality fundamentally violates your core beliefs about how the world works, it causes what we call schema disruption. This disruption explains why millennials are both the most idealistic and the most cynical generation alive today. They still believe the world should be fair, but they have enough pattern recognition to know that it almost certainly won't be. Take the corporate world, for example. Millennials are frequently roasted for job hopping and lacking company loyalty. But a realist looks at the landscape and sees that pensions have vanished. Many full-time roles have become contract gigs, and mass layoffs are now a standard business strategy. Millennials didn't invent the lack of loyalty. They simply adapted to an environment that treats workers as interchangeable parts. Despite this, they remain one of the most educated and diverse generations in human history, as possessing a specific psychological profile that questions everything. They interrogate the status quo because they grew up with the internet, and where they saw multiple versions of the truth depending on who was controlling the narrative. When critical thinking meets systems that were never meant to be questioned, the system labels the thinker as entitled or difficult. The mental health conversation is where millennials have actually made their mark, being the first to widely destigmatize therapy. They talk about anxiety and burnout as biological realities rather than character flaws, which is a massive leap forward for the species. However, they are doing this while living in conditions that are objectively more stressful than the ones their parents faced. Housing costs have outpaced wage growth by absurd margins, and student debt levels have reached a point that would have been considered a national emergency in the 1960s. Then there is the shadow of the future, the existential dread of watching the planet deteriorate. While being told it's your job to fix it, climate anxiety is now a legitimate clinical phenomenon. And millennials are right in the crosshairs, expected to solve global crises with fewer resources than the people who cause them. So when society looks at this generation and asks, "Why are you so anxious? Why can't you just buy a house?" It is a form of collective gaslighting. The psychology of the millennial is incredibly predictable when you look at the terrain they've had to cross. They are responding exactly how a human organism responds when the landscape shifts and the map no longer matches the territory. They aren't killing industries, they are struggling to survive them. They aren't lazy, they are exhausted from running a race. It's where the finish line keeps being moved by the people who already finished it. If this analysis of the millennial schema hit home for you, it's because your brain has been trying to tell you that the pressure you feel isn't your fault. You aren't failing at a fair game, you're playing a rigged one. And with a high-performance brain that knows the math doesn't add up. Join us at The Last Realists, where we skip the generational bickering and look at the raw neurobiological truth of the modern world. Subscribe and hit the bell, because while the world is busy judging your entitlement, we're here to help you understand your resilience. Click the next video to understand why your burnout is actually a sophisticated defense mechanism against an unsustainable reality. We'll see you in the next exploration.